Welcome to this little Dharma talk. I will say up front that I am not necessarily trained as a Dharma teacher. I am trained as a university professor, so as you can see, I do have slides. So if this is triggering in any way where you're starting to think about, oh no, is this going to be another lecture? Well, yes, it will be a lecture, but I do want to make sure that this is something that touches you in the heart somehow. Because my goal for this is not for you to think about this just intellectually. It's to see how Buddha Dharma ultimately lives in our day-to-day lives. So to begin, we already did a little bit of a meditation, but I want to take the time to set our intention. This is something that we do in the Tibetan tradition before any teaching, where we take the moment to sit and set the intention as to why we are here. So you can keep your eyes open or you're closed, your choice. Just take the moment to set your intention. Ask yourself, why am I here? What is this practice for? And once that intention is set, take a deep breath into the lungs, sending it all the way down to the low belly. And as you exhale out the mouth, know that that intention is sealed. So what's my story for the day? Well, today I want to go a little more autobiographical at first, so that this is only my second time seeing you all in this larger setting. So I want to make sure that you all get to know who I am, where I'm from, and what's my story, because ultimately that story might tell you a little bit about your story. So as Snim introduced, I was born here in the States, but I was born in a Korean family. So we were an immigrant family, and this was my daily life. One of the things that I thought was common across all cultures was that families eat dinner together. They share meals, and this was true when I was living in the States. And then in 1997, when I was 10 years old, my family decided, hey, let's go back to the motherland for a change. So we spent 4 years in Seoul, South Korea. And when I was living in South Korea, this image was everywhere. It was in all the television dramas. You can even see that this one is, I don't know which particular drama this is, but you know that you can see the NBC logo. Given the coloring, I think this is less of a nighttime drama. It looks more like a daytime 연속극 than it does, just by looking at the 화질, or the photo quality, but that's neither here nor there. But you can see that this is a multi-generational family, and this is how I grew up. When we moved to Korea, we lived in a 3-bedroom apartment. My nuclear family, myself, my younger brother, father and mother. We lived with our maternal grandparents, grandfather, grandmother, and then we lived with an aunt and an uncle, 3 cousins. So that's like 9 people in a 3-bedroom apartment. But this is something that's not all that uncommon in Korean families, or at least it wasn't. And when we came back to the States, it doesn't matter what you've been doing during the daytime. I go to school, my parents go to work, but then we would come back home and we would make sure that we would have dinner together. We would share preferably breakfast too, but at the very least dinner. But things have shifted. Life gets complicated, especially if you live in a family where all the parental figures are working, and then eventually people scatter. Now, this is something that maybe some of you have experienced as well. Maybe you grew up eating meals together. Maybe you still do, but some of you, especially those of you who have sent your children off to college, that empty nest that they talk about, it's not just a nest that's empty, it's the dinner table that's empty. And this is something that is particularly painful for Korean people because we devise an entire culture based off of sharing meals. I mean, I can go academic with it. If we look at the kinship ties, a lot of the studies that anthropologists have done of Korea have shown that ultimately, the Korean history is one of tribes. We have clans. And with these different clans, the social kinships, as anthropologists call them, are very strong. And we have these rituals that keep us together. But when the very basics of eating dinner together have gone off, what happens? We're yearning for that connection. We're eating lunches and dinners by ourselves. Some of you might even recognize this yourself. Maybe, I don't know if you know this particular YouTuber, but there's this entire phenomenon that Korea has exported out to the rest of the world. I don't know if I'm proud of that, but it is something that we have exported, this idea of a mukbang or a eating broadcast. Now, in the States, we know these as very gluttonous forms of just shoving as much face in our foods, food challenges. It's almost like a sport. But the original impulse behind this was the Korean instinct, the cultural instinct that we had was to share meals. And by sharing meals, we would know about one another. We would learn about what happened in the day. But that's shifted. We don't have those kinships anymore. Even those of you who have visited Korea, you see how small those apartment units are. Everything is efficiency units. Some people don't even live in full units. They live in what used to be little dormitories for students who are studying for the civil exams or their exams. That's where office workers sleep. When you're eating, you don't have faces in front of you that are physical faces. You put on your headphones. You open up whatever instant ramen or whatever you get from the 편의점 or the konbi, right? And then you just eat your instant food with your phone set there, and if you're feeling a little lonely, you turn on a mukbang broadcast. This seems to have been exported because it seems to have resonated with all sorts of people, and we know that this is not something that is ultimately helpful in our long term. You've probably seen a lot of headlines in the news. Even journalists have started seeing, oh wow, even these ideas of the mukbang, you can see on the lower left corner, this lonely dinner table, this becomes the seeds of depression. And then you can see on the lower right, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has really set loneliness as some sort of big public health issue. And this is something that is seen globally, not just in Korea, not just in the States. And one thing that you'll see is that this has real life consequences. So one thing that you'll find, especially in the United States, is that with this fragmentation, this atomization of social ties, we see an increase of various social ills. So I'll talk about this in more detail in a bit, but there are these diseases of loneliness have evolved to the point where there are 3 types of deaths that various sociologists have named deaths of despair. 절망의 죽음, 절망의 사망. Those are drug and alcohol poisoning. This is something that we see all the time on the news, especially here in New Jersey, especially if you're closer to Philadelphia. You know what I'm talking about. There's an increase in suicide, and this is going to be very important in our lecture later on. And also alcoholic liver disease, cirrhosis. Some might even add cardiovascular diseases like diabetes coronary artery diseases, heart diseases, because those are all based off of that same stress. So here's our problem. We are fragmented and we don't have these ties. We don't have something that binds us together. And we're searching and searching and searching. But there's nothing there for us that pushes back on us, so we fall into despair. So, naturally, this is the state of the world. We have to ask ourselves, well, before we find a solution, we have to understand where it comes from. And I apologize that this is where it becomes a boring sociology lecture. So if you don't like reading or you don't like books, feel free to let your mind wander. But I will say that if you listen carefully, there might be a couple of things in the next couple of slides that might resonate with you. So the first book that I want to recommend that some of you find is Bowling Alone by Robert D. Putnam. So Robert Putnam was an American sociologist based out of Harvard University. And in 2000, he published this very seminal or very important text that became the foundation of how we in our popular society, our popular discourse, talk about loneliness. So what Putnam talks about is this idea of fragmentation through the loss of civic engagement. So he noticed that people were not joining these civic organizations, things like the Rotary Club or the YMCA. We think of the YMCA as just some sort of health club or a gym to go to, but that in and of itself is symbolic of this shift in American culture. Because the YMCA was more than a health club. It was a place where people would meet. It's a place where people would have community. So we've lost all those community centers, and this is problematic for a government set up based off of the principles of liberal democracy. And the one thing that he tried to figure out was, well, why is this happening? Why are all of these different societies losing their prominence? And he realized, well, it's more than just one thing. He blamed a couple of things, being a man of a particular age and a particular time. He did talk about, it's the entry of women into the workforce. But there is something to be said for the fact that the workforce was structured around the idea that there was another person at home to take care of the family. Now, this work, as I mentioned, it's complicated, it's not universally praised, but it did provide us with a foundational metaphor. And building off of that, a more contemporary work was by Anne Case and Angus Deaton. Now, Angus Deaton, I actually know myself personally because he's a professor of sociology here at Princeton University. And he was the one who coined the term these diseases or deaths of despair. And I have a little blurb from the back of the book here, but one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is that he was studying specifically the white working class here in the States, and it was the structures, the social structures of how American work culture and the infrastructure was built. All of these different factors, it's not because the individual was trying to do something and they couldn't, or that people are lazy. This is not simply about you, go out and make friends. Well, if your entire environment is not built for you to make friends, how can you make friends? But here's one thing that I want you to start thinking about. This might feel very contemporary, it's very relevant, but this is not a new problem. In fact, both of these sociologists draw from a very foundational figure in the world of sociology and anthropology, Émile Durkheim. He's considered the father of modern sociology and modern anthropology. But what he was really able to do was he articulated a theory of social fragmentation precisely because he was interested in how social structures arise. How do these bonds lead to complex societies? So he was also very, very interested in this phenomenon of suicide. And what he noticed was that there's a paradox. Societies that are further developed, whether we talk about it industrially developed, economically developed, these societies actually have a higher rate of suicide than societies that are less developed. Furthermore, he found out that there's a type of suicide, because he was very fascinated by this idea of why would people kill themselves? Why would they end their own lives? And he found that there are various reasons, and amongst developed societies, there's a specifically unique type of suicide that he called anomic suicide. And I want to introduce you to this idea of anomie. Anomie is this notion that we are deviating from or isolated from rules and common ties. And this becomes the foundation of an illness that ends up alienating society. So I apologize that I will have to read through some text because I am a professor of rhetoric, which means that I do like to do texts, but I will note that if you take the time to read Durkheim, there's something about older scholars, like when people say, oh, scholarly writing, it's so technical, it's dry, it's boring. I'm with you, but there's something about especially the 19th century, where the writing is so vivid, and I want you to hear this language. Irrespective of any external regulatory force, our capacity for feeling is in itself an insatiable and bottomless abyss. But if nothing external can restrain this capacity, it can only be a source of torment to itself. Unlimited desires are insatiable by definition, and insatiability is rightly considered a sign of morbidity. Being unlimited, they constantly and infinitely surpass the means at their command. They cannot be quenched. Inextinguishable thirst is constantly renewed torture. That doesn't sound like a sociologist when I read that. That sounds almost like it comes out of one of the Buddhist commentaries, right? Insatiable desires. Even Durkheim saw all of this. And there are a couple of other choicey quotes that I want you to take a look at to help piece together how Durkheim came up with this argument. He says that in order for us to really achieve something in society, we need to be able to limit our passions, our individual desires, our 욕망, right? Only then can we harmonize it all. But what we end up doing is that when we feel like we've come to a place as a society where we've made it, 성수했다, 잘했다, we become very complacent. And then when we become complacent, that leaves. That sense of mission, that sense of connection dissipates. And this becomes a big problem. This is where that notion of anomic suicide appears. I will highlight these 3 little sentences that I'll read. I won't read the whole thing for you. It is well worth a read, and these slides will be available, so if anyone wants those slides, come and find me afterwards. The state of deregulation, or anomie, is thus further heightened by passions being less disciplined, precisely when they need more disciplining. That means that this illness that we feel, this anomie, happens when those desires that we have, that infinite desire, that hedonism is not put in check. Nothing gives satisfaction, and all this agitation is uninterruptedly maintained without appeasement. So if there's a culture that simply feeds into the desire, because that desire is profitable, what's going to happen? It becomes torment. How could the desire to live not be weakened under such conditions? I want you to pay special attention to this next part, because this becomes very illustrative of what we're experiencing today. There, the state of crisis in anomie is constant and, so to speak, normal. From top to bottom of the ladder, greed is aroused without knowing where to find ultimate foothold. Nothing can calm it, since its goal is far beyond all that it can attain. Reality seems valueless by comparison with the dreams of fevered imaginations. Reality is therefore abandoned, but so too is possibility abandoned when it in turns becomes reality. A thirst arises for novelties, unfamiliar pleasures, nameless sensations, all of which lose their savor once known. These are not the words of a sociologist. If anything, these are the words of a prophet. And he wrote this text in 1897. What he predicted was exactly what we're experiencing right now. Our current culture, and I'm not saying this as some sort of with a political idea in mind, I'm just talking about the empirical reality, the reality that we can sense that our culture is out to get us. Think about all of these things about AI-mediated realities, this metaverse, or all of these things where we just become so swept up, or the images that we see on social media. The fact that there are so many ways to create fake footage, fake videos, that we don't know what's real and what's not. Even our social ills when it comes to our political opinions. You hear fake news. You hear bubbles, right? Echo chambers. All of that amplified through the lens of the smallest screens that we have. And this is born by the evidence that we find. Social science research has shown that these conditions in our culture are leading to actual physical and mental harm. I see this myself as a professor. When I work with my students do not have the endurance to be able to read a full book. My students do not have the ability to sit still, not because I want them to be quiet, but I want them to be able to pay attention, to look into their text, to see what the details are, to find something on their own instead of saying, okay, I want you to do this, this, and this. Students don't have the time to think, and it's not their fault. It's the structure that we're living in. And then this is not just for young people. In fact, research has shown that it's amongst the older generations that have more difficulty distinguishing between AI-generated images and videos than it is amongst young people. So this is a universal problem. And ultimately, this is not just our digital reality, our physical reality is shaped in such a way because our society is built not with human beings in mind, but with the profit motive in mind. Think about how we live in the States. How easy is it to live in the States without a car? To even walk in your own neighborhood safely. Unless you're in a big city, you go everywhere by car. Think about the fact that this is one of the most perverse things that it's depraved. This is degenerate. The fact that a refrigerator has a touch screen and now Samsung decides, oh, we're going to put ads all over that refrigerator screen. I mean, some of you are driving new cars like with those big screens, and now Tesla and I forget which of the other car manufacturers are thinking of putting ads in the middle of your driving. We've lost all sense of reality. And ultimately, where does this all come from? It comes from this idea of accepting that we are not humans, that we don't have dignity, that we are just agents, not even agents, we are objects from which value can be extracted. I mean, so those of you who are old enough might recognize the background. It's the code of the matrix. And you might even notice on the lower right-hand corner that picture of a baby being jacked into the matrix. This was not fiction. This was a truth. It was a metaphor. I'm not literally jacked in, but let's be honest. What is Elon Musk trying to do with putting chips in our brains, right? This is where we are heading. So returning to Durkheim, this is something where we see that he was able to, even from that early stage, he was able to find that ultimately we are stopped in our tracks. Nothing remains for us to gaze upon. There is no goal. And this is why you had all of those existentialists in the early 20th century, the horrors of war after World War I, and these stories out of World War II from all of the horrors. But those horrors were always there. And I want to take the time to actually read this particular passage. It's a longer passage, but it is useful for us. Anomie, therefore, is a regular and specific factor in suicide in our modern societies, one of the springs from which the annual contingent feeds. So we have here a new type to distinguish from the others. It differs from them in its dependence, not on the way in which individuals are attached to society, but on how it regulates them. Egoistic suicide results from man's no longer finding a basis for existence in life. Altruistic suicide, because this basis for existence appears to man situated beyond life itself. The third sort of suicide, the existence of which has just been shown, results from man's activities lacking regulation and his consequent sufferings. By virtue of its origin, we shall assign this last variety the name of anomic suicide. Anomic suicide appears because of lack of connection and lack of meaning. So what's the lesson here? If you're feeling isolated, it's not your fault. This is not the responsibility of an individual. It's the consequence of centuries of policies driven by the profit motive. This is just a natural consequence. Economics is not evil. Capitalism is not evil. It's just cause and effect. And unfortunately for us as human beings, this is not for our own benefit. But in face of all of this, you might be asking, well, what am I going to do about this? What's there to do? I feel powerless. Here's the thing. You're not alone in realizing this. It doesn't take a genius to realize that we are suffering. In fact, this was an ancient problem. This is not new, friends. Someone you know very well also saw this problem, and he realized this problem a long time ago, before Angus Deaton, before Robert Putnam, even before Emile Durkheim. And the nice thing for us, the lucky thing for us who are gathered here, is that he also found a solution to the social ills of our time and his time. Now, I know that that was obvious, but we do want to take the time to consider, how can dharma be an antidote to this anomie that we're experiencing? I know many of you might be skeptical about this, because when you think about Buddhism, the image that we have is someone sitting peacefully, maybe chanting a mantra or two, maybe looking at you with kind eyes and going, oh, that's all we see of Buddhism. But here's the thing, if we actually study Buddha Dharma, it points to universal truths that transcend history. The truths of the Dharma, the Four Noble Truths, are true here, in this time, and just as true as it was during the Buddha's time. Now, through the analysis of these four truths, we see that there's actually a clear social mission. This is the thing that a lot of people miss in Buddhism because we think of it as very contemplative and therefore we have to be alone by ourselves. I have to go into a hermitage, an amda, right? I have to just be by myself. I have to do solo practice. And yes, that is a part of the practice, but especially for those of us who imbue Mahayana or 대승불교, the logical consequence of the core of Mahayana Buddhism, bodhicitta, purishim, it leads to these pro-social behaviors that can help us re-tie with one another. I'm going to prove this to you by going to the earliest existing traditions of Buddhism, which is in the Pali Canon. So this is from the Samyutta Nikaya. Sometimes it's called the Mata Sutta. Mata is mother. In fact, mater, Latin, mata, and ma. Sanskrit and Pali mata, they all come from the same roots. And I want to read this from you because this is a traditional teaching that's taught in many, many Buddhist realms. Bhikkhus, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. It is not easy, bhikkhus, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter. For what reason? Because, bhikkhus, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. It is enough to become disenchanted with all the fabricated things, enough to become dispassionate, enough to be released. And I'll read this in Korean. 비구들이여, 이 윤회의 시작은 알 수 없다. 무명으로 가로막히고 가래에 얼매겨 윤회하는 중생들의 시작점은 찾아낼 수 없다. 비구들이여, 이 오랜 윤회의 과정에서 이전에 너희 어머니, 아버지, 형제, 자매, 아들, 딸이 아니었던 중생을 찾는 것은 쉽지 않다. 왜냐하면 비구들이여, 이 윤회의 시작은 알 수 없기 때문이다. 모든 형성된 것들에 대해 염증을 느끼고 집착에 벗어나 해탈에 이르는 것으로 충분할 수밖에 없다. This is perhaps part of the earliest strata. And look even within it. Now, I want to take a close look into this text. First off, look at the highlighted text. A first point is not discerned of beings roamed and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. This right here, this is our first noble truth. It is enough to become enchanted with all fabricated things, enough to become dispassionate, enough to be released. This is the third and fourth noble truth, right? So this seems like traditional Buddhist teachings. This seems familiar, but I want to pay attention here. How is it that we're able to see this? Because we can see that this corresponds from Durkheim's idea of suicide, but this third part right here, it is not easy, bhikkhus, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter. This right here is the heart of how we begin to develop bodhicitta. And this right here is the path. Even though bodhicitta, purishim, this seems like 대승불교, this is Mahayana Buddhism. Oh, the Theravadins, the Samsung, they don't have that. No, they do. It's just that we don't really take that in. And what was great about the Mahayanists was that they already had a framework. When Buddhism came to China, they already had a framework for this through Confucianism, Yugyo. And through that, we have this idea of filial piety, hyosim. But notice how this particular line is the path. Filial piety, believe it or not, family ties, social bonds are the path through which Buddhist meditation is possible. And I want to read to you within the Tibetan tradition. This is from Gyaltso Tokme Zangpo Rinpoche's commentary on the 7 points of mind training. And this actually expands on that particular line. And as you're listening to this, you don't have to read the text. I'll read the text for you. So if it's easier for you to visualize in your head, listen to these words, listen to Rinpoche's words, and see how that resonates with you. We begin by focusing clearly on our own mother from this life. From the time she carried us inside her womb, she cared for us unfailingly so that we could encounter the Buddha's teachings and put them into practice. Her kindness is therefore exceedingly great. Not only in this life, but throughout beginningless time in samsara, she has looked upon us with eyes of love, thought of us with affection, shielded us from harm, brought us benefit, and ensured our well-being. Thus, her kindness is very great indeed. Considering that the one who did all this for us is now undergoing various miseries in samsara, cultivate intense compassion. Think, now I shall benefit her in return. I shall eliminate all that harms her. So in the Buddhist practice, filial piety becomes a path in and of itself. I know that traditionally we think, oh, 출가, I'm leaving the house, right? Or I'm going into the mountains, 입산, especially if I'm getting ordination. Those are ways to do it because those are ways to say, I am making a statement, a pledge that I am going to renounce all social ties. But really, that's only in name only, because ultimately it's that love that we've received that becomes our object lesson. That in of itself is the heart of the Buddhist teaching. This is all great, but we also live in the real world. And I'm going to admit, this is a real problem where family fragmentation has gone around. Many of my teachers, my Tibetan teachers, they seem baffled. They'd be like, surely you love your mother. Why are you having troubles? Because their students would ask, Lama La, what if I hate my mother? What if she abused me? And in many cases, there are truly horrifying stories. Now, I work with a lot of transfer students who transfer into Princeton from other places, including the military. And some of the stories that they have shared about their upbringing, absolutely heart-wrenching. I have stories of parents who've kicked their children out of their house. I have stories of parents who have actually sold their children just so they can buy drugs. These aren't common stories. They're not uncommon. And it is true that there are these breakages of bonds because of suffering, because of the pain. This is especially true for those of us in immigrant communities, because it's very easy for us to find that our families scatter. Some of you might know someone, whether they're your friends whose children are no longer speaking with them. Some of you might have cut off your own parents. And it's not always malignant. Sometimes it happens because you live in different places. Sometimes it's because you live in different worlds. And the same thing happened to my family. There were times when I would not speak to any of my family members for months on end. There are times when I've disowned my own family because of my own issues, of my own conflicts. I bring this up to acknowledge that this is a reality and that it's something that we can't really predict. But if there's one thing that we know from Buddha Dharma, is that there's no knowing when things will end, but it is certain that they will. Now, I don't have a dramatic story of how I reconciled with my family. There was no car crash and suddenly, oh, we have a family reunion and everything's all great again. No, it took work for us. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of communication and a lot of understanding. But how were we able to get there? For us, it was due to the fact that we had to return to the shared values. That was one thing that my mother and I really ultimately ended up finding common ground on. Ultimately, though the different systems of belief might be different, though she and I might not share the same spiritual path, our values are similar or the same. And if there's something that you can do, where's that common point that we can start from? That becomes the foundations. Now, this is very difficult. I don't have a counseling degree, so I'm not able to help you reconcile with your families should you choose to consult me. I'm the worst person to consult on this. But there are ways to do so, and sometimes there are times that you'll have to accept that that family is fractured forever, because there's something bigger at mind. In the Tibetan tradition, we use what are called the four thoughts that turn the mind towards Dharma, the Lodok Namshe. Thought number one is just how rare it is to have the ability to practice Buddha Dharma. They say that to be born a human being, to be reborn as a human being, it's like a blind turtle in the ocean coming up for air once every 1,000 years and coming up right in the middle of a yoke or right in the middle of a raft. So that teaches us graciousness, being grateful, the fact that you were born in an era where there has been a Buddha that has taught, that you have access to it, and that you live in a world where you're able to practice without persecution. And this is even, it's not just about being human. Many countries practicing Buddha Dharma would send you to death. So how grateful can we be that we are able to practice? But then, why are we practicing? Because we know that all things are impermanent. Death can come for us. And this leads us to our re-examination. Okay, death comes for us all, so, well, is it just time for 잘 먹고 잘 산다? Well, guess what? Just as we saw from Durkheim, those pleasures, there's a limit. Sociologists and psychologists talk about something called the hedonic treadmill. The more you like something, you think you're fulfilled, but no, you want more, you want more, you want more. There's even a Korean proverb or saying, right? 사람의, what was it? Man's greed cannot be contained by the oceans. 사람의 욕심은 바다를 채울 만큼보다 더 많다. And then finally, the fourth thing, the principle behind it all, cause and effect, karma. Now, at first, this seems very depressing, right? Oh no, life is meaningless, it's full of suffering. Oh, what am I going to do? But here's the thing, it's not too late. There's hope in Buddha Dharma. So one of the things that I found that's always been interesting is to listen to the people who care for the dying. And Bronnie Ware is a hospice nurse. She takes care of those who are on their deathbed. And she wrote this very, very important book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. She interviewed hundreds and thousands of her patients and asked, what were your biggest regrets? You might have seen this yourself, I am happy to give this to you, but one of the biggest things that will come out to me that's relevant to us in this case, number 3, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Why is this important for us? It's because those of us who live in these blended families, when there are different cultures, we're so afraid of offending the other person. We're so afraid, oh, this is Korean yay versus this is American yay. What if I accidentally say something wrong? So then we keep it to ourselves. We use compassion as an excuse to not express, oh, I don't want to hurt the other person. Oh, I don't want to tell because if I say what I truly feel to my mother, she's going to cry, and she'd be like, oh, I only gave birth to you, and this is how you repay me. Oh, 술 먹다, 나도 술 먹다. Sometimes I'm afraid of that, but then being able to have the courage to say what you truly feel. And then number 4, we can expand this. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And if she were to write this now, it probably also extends to I wish I had kept my family close. So we have a bunch of diagnoses. We have a deeper understanding. Where do we move forward? What can I do concretely? I want to do a little bit of a etymology or word origin study with you. One of the Korean words for family is 식구, right? And now this is I actually did a little bit of a study here. This is actually unique to Koreans. The Japanese don't call it that. The Chinese don't call it that. They would say like 유guo or other things. But 식구 is specifically Korean. So the character on the left, 식, 먹을 식, or 밥식, literally means meal. Not food, but meal. 구, mouth. So it's the mouths that sit together at a dinner table, sharing a meal. And for those of you who grew up on late 2000s Korean television like I did, that particular show, so this comes from a Korean sketch comedy show called 개그 콘서트. And this one is very, very famous. 대화가 필요해. This corner name, the skit name was literally called We Need to Talk. And the whole premise of the show, or of this sketch, was a dysfunctional family with a very strong 경상도 accent, because I think they're supposed to be Busan people. They're just having all sorts of shenanigans happen while they're eating their meal. But they hate each other. You can see that they're fighting. Sometimes it gets fist fights. But what do? They set the dinner table together. And this, for me, was a very important marker because it shows us how these rituals of sharing meals is important. Now, there are other things that you can do. You can also practice within a formal way, and this is where that commentary came from. There's a very important Indian Buddhist master by the name of Atisha who transmitted the secondary transmission of Buddhism back into Tibet. And he actually gave a 7-point mind training on how to understand cause and effect. And you can see that this all comes from filial piety. This is something that we can do very briefly here. So let's do a quick, brief look through this. So find any comfortable position, eyes open or closed, and just listen. First of all, recall your own mother. Every being, sentient being out there was your own mother. 모든 중생들은 자신의 어머니로 여긴다. So realize that. Take the moment to think that. Now recognize the kindness of mother sentient beings. It doesn't have to be your own physical mother, but whoever took care of you. 어머니 중생들의 은혜를 깨닫는다. Think about all of the sacrifices those who took care of you made. And then think that you want to repay that kindness. 그 은혜를 보답하고 싶은 마음을 섬긴다. That gives rise to affectionate love, the love that is, oh, I want to hug you. 자애로운 사랑. And through that, you build, oh, my mother is suffering. All beings are suffering, just as I was suffering. That's great compassion. 대자대비. Knowing that compassion alone is not just empathy, just feeling the suffering of others is not enough. You got to do something about it. So you make the promise, the extraordinary intention, 대서원. And that's what gives lead to bodhicitta, 보리심. Now you don't have to practice alone. These problems are so much bigger than any one of us. No matter how many PowerPoint slides I put up, that's not going to change the world. What does, though, is practicing together. We practice in fellowship. And if you're seeking community, we here at 원적사 are here for you. So this is just a little bit of a preview of the things that are coming up. So Snim and I were chatting about this, and we were thinking, we have a beautiful opportunity to increase our interactions, to increase fellowship. So we're thinking of starting a regular programming with regular English language Dharma talks, such as this one, and some study groups, especially if you're interested in the foundations of Buddhism. Scripture study, whether we're looking at sutras, jatakas, commentaries, and even contemporary Buddhist authors. Also, thinking about ways to develop mixed language fellowship and support groups, and community meditation instruction, community yoga instruction right here. So be on the lookout for all of that. There will be announcements for it. But know that this is our way of saying, hey, you got an entire Sangha for you. We spend so much time thinking about the Buddha with all of the statues. We think about the Dharma in terms of all of the scriptures. But the one that we don't always bring to mind is the Sangha. It's the community. And I believe in a cosmic Sangha, a universal Sangha. So here we are together, and we'll practice that Sangha together by opening up in dialogue with questions and answers.
예, 정말 바쁘신 가운데 이렇게 좋은 강의를 해주신 우리 최문용 교수님께 큰 박수. 이 강의나 아니면 개인적인 학교 편입하고 싶은 분들도 이렇게 한번 여쭤보시고, 원래 프린스턴에 편입이 없었는데 이제 몇 년 전부터 편입이 생겨서 우리 편입도 우리 교수님이 또 그 담당이고, 또 요가나 오늘 가르치신 내용에 대해서 이제 어떤 질문 있으시면 any question 하시기 바랍니다. 손 드세요. 문법고사님.
Did I put you all to sleep? 너무 오랫동안 했나요?
그쪽에 지금 그 SNS나 이런 것 때문에 진짜 심각하대요. 그래서 애들도 자살이 많고 어른들도 많고 깜짝 놀란 거는 정신과 치료를 70에서 80%가 받는다고 그러더라고요. 그만큼 아까 말씀하신 그 디지털 그 어딕션 그리고 디지털 아이솔레이션 굉장히 심각한 것 같아요.
네.
과거에도 물론 자살이 있었지만 요즘 더욱이 굉장히 급증한 거는 많은 사람들이 SNS나 이런 걸 통해서 모든 사람과 점점 대화도 없어지고 자기만의 세계로 들어가는 거죠.
그렇죠.
그러다 보니까 힘들 때 예전에는 친구나 뭐 부모, 선생님 통해서 얘기도 하고 상담도 하면서 그런 어려움들을 풀었는데 이제는 그 대화 자체가 없어지니까 결국은 혼자 결정하고 자살을 하는 것 같아요. 많이들. 그리고 지금 그래서 SNS가 지금 굉장히 중독이 심각하다고 그러더라고요. 그래서 제가 몇몇 보니까 재밌는 게 그 개발한 스티브 잡스도 그렇고 빌 게이츠도 자기 자식들한테는 절대 그걸 못하게 한다. 왜? 뇌가 망가진다. 되게 심각한 문제인데 아무튼 그게 큰 원인인 것 같고 제가 보기에는 그 괴로움 사실 이게 가장 큰 문제죠. 근데 저희가 불교를 만난 가장 큰 행복하고 감사한 것 중 하나가 괴로움의 소멸이잖아요.
그렇죠.
그렇죠? 이 괴로움 때문에 자살도 하고 모든 건데 사실 부처님도 출가하신 가장 큰 이유가 이 괴로움의 소멸 때문에 출가하신 거잖아요.
네.
그리고 더 좋은 거는 감사한 거는 괴로움을 소멸하는 방법을 결국 찾으셔서 알려주셨죠. 그렇죠? 사성제라든가 뭐 팔정도라든가 이런 방법까지 다 이렇게 주셨고 그래서 너무 감사드리죠. 그리고 사실은 어떤 종교라기보다는 제가 보기에는 불교는 어떤 그 수행하면서 그러니까 부처님은 사실 우리한테는 큰 선배님이시죠. 먼저 불을 가신 괴로움을 소멸하는. 그래서 이 불교 만나기가 어렵고 제대로 된 스승 만나기가 어렵다는 게 사실은 그런 것 같습니다. 그래서 제가 봤을 때는 결국은 불교를 통해서 공부를 하면서 수행을 통해서 그 괴로움을 원인을 찾아내면 사실은 모든 건 별게 아니잖아요. 그렇죠?
그렇죠.
네, 그래서 결국은 수행을 통해서 자기가 깨달음을 얻게 되면 결국은 내가 우주다. 그걸 알고 내가 이 현실을 만들어냈구나. 이걸 알게 되면 사실 모든 괴로움은 없어집니다. 사실.
그렇죠.
그 과정이 어려워서 그런 건데 그래서 제가 보기에는 결국 저희는 참 굉장히 행복하고 럭키한 사람들이에요. 불교를 만났고 수행을 할 수 있는 이런 걸 만났기 때문에 굉장히 좋은 기회고 그래서 그걸 통해서 모든 괴로움을 극복하고 또 나의 자신을 찾는 또 내 남은 인생을 해피하게 살 수 있는 그런 게 결국은 불교라고 생각합니다.
네.
부처님이 가르쳐 주신 많은 방법들이 있으니까 그걸 열심히 따라서 하다 보면 모든 괴로움은 없어질 것 같습니다.
예, 감사합니다. 동입니다.
질문은 안 하시고 이렇게 브리핑 이렇게 잘 서머리를 해주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 우리 젊은 또 학생들이 좀 질문해 줬으면 좋겠습니다. 무슨 느낀 점이나 아니면 any question 하시기 바랍니다. 뭐 학교 문제든지. 예. 예. 예, 그래. 예. 학생들이 좀 해주셨으면 좋겠어요. 예, 샤이하지 마시고.
저도 학생.
예.
네. 잘 안 들리는 것. 들리나요?
들려요.
네. 안녕하세요, 교수님. 네. 예, 저는 여기 원적사의 무호고요. 네, 무호라고 하고 뭐 여러 질문들이 있겠지만 그래도 그 가장 계신 분들도 그렇고 어린 학생들 그게 바이올린걸이나 이제 어릴 때 여기서 태어나셨거나 이제 오신 분들 특히 아까 이제 말씀 중에 얘기하시기로는 학교뿐만 아니라 가정에서
그쵸.
교수님께서도 힘든 시간이 있으셨다고 하셨는데
네.
그거를 이제 불교하고 어떻게 이제 접목을 하셔가지고 좀 그거를 좀 이렇게 벗어날 수 있었던 경험담을 조금 소개해 주시면
예.
좋겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네.
감사합니다. 예, 이제 제가 원래 우리 집안이 솔직히 말하면 우리 집안은 원래 기독교 집안이었거든요. 근데 제가 이제 불교를 만나게 된 것은 제가 대학원생 때 논문을 하는 그 튜토링을 했거든요. 그 튜토링에서 그 학생이 네팔에 가가지고 이런 티베트 중들이랑 이렇게 논쟁하는 그것을 공부를 했어요. 그 학생이 인지학, 인문학, anthropology 그렇게 해가지고 이렇게 필드워크로 갔는데 저는 이제 제가 어려운 것은 아까 전처럼 그 괴로움의 원인 그것을 알게 되면 어느 정도 이제 알겠구나 내가 왜 이렇게 괴로워하는지 또 수행 방법 중에 이제 참선을 하다가 이게 참선을 하는 과정에서 여러 가지의 뭐 감동들이라든지 afflictive emotions 번뇌라고 하죠. 그 번뇌들을 이제 그게 왜 있느냐 그렇게 생각이 되는 거죠. 왜냐하면 참선이 있으면 꼼짝 말고 있어야 하니까. 그러니까 마음은 소리 지르고 싶고 뭐 움직이고 싶고 하는데 너무 답답하니까. 근데 눈치 때문에 움직이지도 못하고 혼자서 괴로워하니까 그게 시간이 되더라고요. 그래서 특히 참선이라든지 좌선을 하는 그 수행이 그 인내심을 기르는 거죠. 그 인내심을 기르는데 그게 시간이 필요한 거죠. 그만큼 우리가 특히 우리 현대 사회에서는 우리가 묵상이라든지 명상을 할 시간이 없으니까 계속 꼬고 하니까 그게 시간이 반성할 시간이 없잖아요. 그래서 그게 아주 뭐 현실적으로 말을 하면 그게 가장 운영적으로 가장 도움이 됐어요. 우선은. 그 다음에 뭐 몇 년 동안 뭐 수행을 하다가 이제 티베트 쪽으로 가게 된 것은 그냥 뭐 다른 얘기가 있는데 그게 좀 더 불교를 좀 더 크게 볼 수 있다라는 것을 배웠어요. 모든 삶의 면에 있는 것을 이제 불교의 렌즈로 볼 수 있다라고 배운 거죠. 특히 보리심이라든지 아니면 염원, intention 그거를 어떻게 하느냐. 그러면 모든 행동을 어떻게 그게 맞느냐. 뭐 윤리라든지 도덕이라고 할 수는 없지만 말을 할 수 없지만 그걸 아주 그냥 인과, cause and effect. 그게 생각을 하면 이런 것을 염을 할 수 있고 mindful하게 할 수 있으니까 okay, this is useful for me. 그리고 또 그 진리가 있죠. 부처님께서 가르치신 그 진리가 그 센 도이라든지 그걸 흡수를 하게 되는 거죠. 그래서 그렇게 해가지고 뭐 물론 우리 어머님께서는 아직도 교회를 나가시지만 그래도 어느 정도 그런 의사소통이 되는 거죠. 그래서 서로의 신앙이라든지 뭐 서로의 관점을 존경을 할 수 있고 대화를 할 수 있게 돼요. 그래서 대화를 하니까 그렇게 별로 다를 게 없다. 뭐 기독교는 뭐 이 이름을 붙이지만 사실은 특히 기독교에서 좀 더 미스티컬한 쪽으로 가면 그러니까 교회처럼 그래 institutionalized 된 것보다는 뭐 건축된 것보다는 그 성경에 대해서 말하면 진짜로 보면 거기에 여러 가지의 말들이 참 고행이라든지 그런 게 뭐가 있느냐 그게 다 나오거든요. 그래서 서로 그런 식으로 공통점에서 대화를 하니까 이게 풀리더라고요. 그래서 ultimately communication. 근데 그걸 하려면 어느 정도 우리가 우리의 자존심을 버려야 하는 거죠. 그것도 불교가 아주 유용하게 할 수 있는 것이죠. 특히 절을 할 때 108절이라든지 티베트에서는 한 10만 번이나 절을 해야 하는 것이 그게 입시점입니다. 네.
Hello,
Hi there.
my name is Diane. First of all, thank you so much for the lecture. It was really intriguing and very interesting. My name is Diana. I'm currently a junior at Princeton University.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. So I think as a student at a very, I guess, very rigorous community, and everyone's very academically, everything's very academically rigorous. I think it's very easy to lose sight of, I guess, the foundational like Buddhist thoughts per se. I come from Buddhist background, so I think I'm rooted in that kind of psychology and that kind of philosophy. And I think in an attempt to kind of regain that kind of thought process, I actually took under Dr. Sharma, one of the Buddhist courses at Princeton this past semester. And it was actually one of my favorite courses that I took at Princeton. I think I definitely regained a lot of not only the history of Buddhism, but also the ways of thought and how I can kind of retain that within myself as a person as well. I think although it is very easy to lose sight of all those things in such a busy community, and even the works I do, I'm a psychology major at Princeton right now, and one of the works that I'm doing is me and a couple of other students, we're working on this app called Lumos. Pretty much it's an app on students' phones that helps track their physiological reactions by the day, and then it predicts when they're going to fall into like an episode of like depression or a panic attack. And I just, doing some of that work, I think I feel a lot of like internal conflict because, as you said in part of your lecture, the whole like media and like our exposure to these apps and our phones and everything whatnot, it kind of contradicts the work that or the goals that we're trying to reach with this kind of app. And I think it's I guess the combination of those two things is very hard to avoid in today's world. So I was wondering what your, I guess, perspective on balancing those two things are, because I think it's just like kind of impossible and inevitable at this point. How do we work through healthfully combining those two things, but also reaching our foundational goals that Buddha teaches us as well?
Thank you very much for that question. It's an excellent question. So, in this highly technological society, how do we balance all of that? I think ultimately it's to remember good, bad are all human categories that we put on top of it, and technology is not evil. It's just that, as you said, we have to be wary of how various features of technologies can end up creating any harmful effects. So when it comes to, we can discuss offline. You can even come to my office later on if you wanted to chat about, especially if you have JP questions or senior thesis questions. I used to be a writing fellow, so I'm used to all of that. But when it comes to, I think your question actually sits in how do we be Buddhists in a world where we know that there are poisons around us. And there are three ways, and it's up to you as to how you kind of choose with what you resonate. So in the Tibetan and also just broadly speaking, the Vajrayana, Kumgangsung Bulgo, we talk about poisons, tok. There are three ways to approach it. If you approach it from the, I don't like the word, but the Hinayana, Sosungbulgo style, then it would be to avoid it altogether. Avoid technology. No. The Bodhicitta way, the Bodhisattva way, Mahayana Buddhism, Taesung-Bulgo, the idea is instead of saying no to the poison, we say we treat the poison, find the antidote. So that means, okay, well, I just need to, what's the antidote for this technology? It's to do something in real life and make it more in like a journal instead. But this is where I think the third form of Buddhism, which is Vajrayana Buddhism, the path of the lightning bolt, is we take the poison and we turn it into medicine. How can you turn technology into medicine? And the reason why Vajrayana practice focuses on that particularly is because it understands that all things are inherently empty of existence in the sense that they are impermanent. So that means the dose makes the poison. I know it sounds kind of woo-woo, homeopathy, likewise, but it is true. And in that same way, the way that you're developing the technology, how can you turn that into a way that doesn't feed into the addictions? But also, what are the other features that you want users to be able to take from it? Because let's be honest, the reason why you're developing an app is because that's the best way to reach people. Full stop. So we have to accept that. Something that I wonder all the time. Now, I have the luxury at Princeton University where I have a captive audience. Students are forced to take my writing seminars. So that means that they have no choice, so I get to force them to read full books. 500 pages for the first reading, by the way. So I have the opportunity to do that, but then when you're working in an open marketplace and you're trying to increase your reach, you gotta shift your strategies. Ultimately, how do we make sure that this all works? It's to go back to review your intentions. And this is especially important for those of us who follow Mahayana Buddhism, whether we're staying within the sutra realm or we go into like mantrayana, tantrayana, and stuff like that. That we can talk about offline. But that intention is important because that intention allows you to connect. And that's also the same thing as how do we live a Buddhist life. It's ultimately praxis. Buddhism is not sitting in meditation. Buddhism is embodying the awakened spirit, the bodhicitta, bodhisim. That has to show up in the way that we act in the world. And therefore, Buddhism ultimately is an active form of activity. So hopefully that helps answer some of those questions.
Hello, I'm Hun Soo. I'm a freshman at Ridgewood High School. And over the past few years, since like the start of middle school, I've been sort of losing connection with Buddhism. And at the start of high school, my main goal was to get closer with Buddhism. But now, with midterms coming up and all that, and I've been starting to do content creation, I've been sort of losing connection with Buddhism again. And I'm kind of scared about that, because I don't want to lose it. So do you have like any tips on how to get closer, like regain that connection with Buddhism?
That's a very good question. So let me ask you, what specifically about Buddhism makes you want to stay close to it?
I just want like implement Buddhism into like my life, or like how I treat my friends, my family, like my superiors. Because as I've been sort of losing my connection with Buddhism, I've been sort of became more like short-tempered, and I would like relied on my fists instead of like talking things out as like a solution. And so I don't want to use violence anymore as a solution. I'd rather just talk things out. Like I want to have like sort of like a more pacifist solution to conflicts.
You have your answer right there. You have your intention. You noticed once you kind of move away from the Buddhist teachings, you start realizing they have actual effects on your day-to-day life in your actions. So that's the first thing, motivation. Now, the question is, on a practical level, what's the programming going to be? What's my workout? What's my sets, right? How am I going to do this? Is it like a bulking phase, a cutting phase, or whatever, right? Ultimately, it depends on what works for you. So some people, they need to have a lot of structure where they say, I need to spend 3 hours in practice. If I were to follow my teacher's instructions, I would be chanting all day. I would have just shaved my head and become a monk myself. But that's not realistic for my karma. So what's the one thing that I can do? Or what are the small things that I can do to create a daily remembrance of it? And for me, that's very easy. I have a set of mantra practices that were given to me by my teachers. And even if I don't spend the time actually opening up a sutra or anything like that, the mere fact that even if it's just right before bed when I'm right about to go to sleep and I'm like, oh, I guess I have to do my practice. And it's literally just 5 minutes, but it's just literally, all right, I have to do this recitation, that recitation. That at least creates a little bit of inertia because it creates that continuous line. So that's one thing you can do as a formal practice that you do every single day. It can be short. It can be something that you link to something that you do every day. Let's say right before you go into the shower or during the shower, you just have a quick mantra. Those are different ways to kind of slide that into your day-to-day life. But in terms of how do we grow and develop that bodhicitta, that's where having fellowship is going to be useful. Having the opportunity to go to Buddhist teachings, such as this one, or Buddhist study. People do it on their own. Historically, a lot of people have studied on their own, but I've found that it's very difficult to study on your own. And especially in the Tibetan tradition, we talk about the importance of teachers because the teachers are there to help energize that practice. So you need some sort of source that helps you stay motivated. And that might be, maybe there's a teacher on YouTube that you really connect with, or maybe you come and join us for our sessions here. And just any time that you can connect, but don't force it, because you will burn out. And once you start dreaming in Sanskrit mantras, you might think, oh, I must be getting something big. And then the old teachers, the old sages would say, that's a delusion, that's chakak, that's an obstacle. Stop that, sit down and just meditate.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 김연지라고 하고 뉴욕에서 석사 과정을 하고 있는 학생입니다. 저는 어저께 그 요즘 되게 유명한 No Other Choice라는 영화 혹시 아세요? 이병헌님 나오고 해서 상을 많이 받은 영화인데 개봉해서 보러 갔다가 왔는데 자본주의 현대 사회를 풍자하는 영화더라고요. 거기서도 뭐 AI가 일자리들을 대체하면서 가장이 실직을 하게 되고 그리고 재취직을 하게 되는 과정에서 막 살인을 저지르고 하는 것들을 No Other Choice라고 되게 그려놓은 그런 영화여서 제가 어저께 굉장히 여러 가지 생각들이 들었어요. 그러면서 이렇게 불안정한 사회에서 지금 이런 저희의 젊은 세대가 좀 소속감을 다시 느낄 수 있도록 할 수 있는 저희가 가장 먼저 회복해야 될 감각이나 가장 쉽게 할 수 있는 방법이 뭐가 있을까 여쭤보고 싶었고 그리고 또 한 가지는 조금 더 개인적인 질문인데 그 물리학 그리고 분자 생물학 그리고 명상 지도자까지 하시는 거 보시면 제가 느꼈을 때는 이런 세상에 대한 근본적인 구조나 이런 호기심이 있으신 게 아닌가라는 생각이 들었거든요. 그래서 어쩌면 불교와 그런 과학과의 공통점을 생각해 보면 어쩌면 엄청 방대하고 어려운 아이디어를 어떻게 보면 define 해야 되고 저희도 불교의 많은 가르침들 속에서 그거를 저희가 받아들이는 쉬운 가르침으로 느껴야 깨달음이 있다고 저는 생각해 왔거든요. 그래서 박사님이 공부해 오시면서 그런 과학에 대한 지식이 어쩌면 불교를 조금 이해하는 데 도움이 되셨다면 그 어떤 방법이 있었고 팁이 있으셨으면 저희에게도 조금 공유해 주셨으면 해서 말씀드립니다.
예, 감사합니다. 우선 첫 번째 질문, 우리가 특히 뭐 젊은 세대뿐만 아니라 여러 세대들, 다 세대들 좀 더 이 현대 사회에서 어떻게 근본적으로 루트를 낼 수 있느냐. 제 생각에는 특히 제가 이제 요가 강의를 하거든요. 요가 강의를 하다 보니까 특히 우리 현대 사회에서는 몸을 잘 못 써요. 몸에 대한 몸에 대한 감각이라든지 그런 게 없으니까 거기서 많이 흩어지니까 첫 번째로 추천하는 게 운동이에요. 운동. 왜냐하면 운동이라고 하면 꼭 뭐 하고 싶은 운동으로 하세요. 꼭 뭐 헬스장 같은 거까지 가지 않으셔도 되고 그냥 뭐 산책이라든지 산보라든지 그렇게 해도 되는데 우선은 우리가 이제 특히 SNS라든지 그런 게 다 디지털로 화면으로 보이는 거잖아요. 우리가 또 다른 말로 하면 화경이 되는 거죠. 화경하다가 환각을 하는 거죠. 그러니까 그게 환상을 하는 게 이제 스크린 정면, 이게 화면이 이렇게 되니까 우선은 우리가 근본적으로 뭐를 느낄 수 있느냐. 내 몸 안에 있는 촉감이라든지 그런 식으로 우선은 운동부터 시작을 해가지고 그게 명상이 돼요. 그게 우리 현대 사람들 중에서 가장 쉽게 명상을 할 수 있는 방법 중에 하나예요. 저도 이제 추천을 할 때는 사람들이 뭐 상담을 할 때 뭐 명상을 어떻게 시작하겠느냐 그렇게 상담을 할 때 전 우선은 운동을 하세요. 운동부터 시작을 해가지고 그게 돼가는 거에 가장 유리한 것 같아요. 그리고 거기서부터 이제 운동을 하면 내 몸에서 이렇게 느낀다. 그걸로 붙어서 어느 정도 그게 안정이 되면 그 다음에 그렇게 그 근본에서 빌딩을 할 수 있는 거죠. 그 다음에 두 번째로 질문하신 것이 이제 뭐 물리학이라든지 뭐 과학이라든지 그거를 불교랑 같이 뭐 생각을 하는데 제가 가장 유용했던 충고 말씀을 받았을 때는 그게 뭐였냐면 relax, keep it easy. 너무 노력하려고 하지 마. 그렇게 들었어요. 특히 제가 이제 제가 좌선할 때도 그렇게 법사님한테서 그렇게 받았고 그다음에 저도 이제 제 티베트 지도 스님들께서도 그게 하시는 말이 진짜로 natural relaxation. 왜냐하면 노력을 너무 하려면 이게 뭘 집착하게 되잖아요. 집착하게 된다면 환각을 하고 착각해야 되고 그래서 그냥 자연스럽게 받아들이는 것. 그럴 수 있구나. 그게 가장 유리한 거죠. 그것도 우리 전에 누가 물어보신 질문 중에서 어떻게 가족이랑 통화를 할 수 있느냐, 소통이 되느냐, 어떻게 불교가 어떻게 그걸 도움을 줬느냐, 그것도 마찬가지예요. 그럴 수 있구나. 나는 몰랐는데, 참 재밌네. How interesting. For those of you who are thinking about upper level studies, be very careful when your professor says, "Oh, that's interesting," because that could mean that they think that your idea is indeed worth it, or they might think they don't have anything else to say, but "Oh yeah, that's interesting." So, 재밌구나, 신기하구나, 그럴 수 있구나. 그런 마음으로 가지고 다니시면 어느 정도 편안하게 할 수 있으니까 그게 가장 자연적으로 이렇게 보리심을 키울 수 있다고 생각을 합니다. 도움이 됐는지 모르겠지만
시간 관계상 많이들 배고프실 텐데 이상으로 Q&A를 마치고 공양하시고 이따가 또 티타임이 있으니까 또 여쭤보실 분들은 다시 또 티타임을 해주시면 좋겠습니다. 우리 귀한 시간을 내주신 우리 교수님께 큰 박수 한번 더.